I am Chris Carpenter, better known as Chris Rex, and for the last 9 years I have been traveling up and down the roads as an independent professional wrestler. I have had the opportunity to train, work with, and share locker rooms with some of the best to ever step foot inside the squared circle. My co-host is Alex Al-Kazzaz, aka the Bear of Texas. A journalist born outside of Lyon, France, he moved to the United States at the age of 4, and his love of sports is what led him to become a sports writer. And with 7 years under his belt already, the sky is the limit for this young Texan. Together, we mix my knowledge and professional experience with his research and sports journalism to bring you a unique view on Vice TV's hit series, Dark Side of the Ring. This is Dark Side of the Podcast.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? It's a long process. It's a hard, thought out process. Yeah, I know. I was there. From March of this year, thinking about how I'm going to do this, doing all my research, trying to get everything right. What platforms can we use and how we going to record it and how we going to make it sound good and make it all this happen. And then I came upon Anchor. The Anchor app on my phone, the easiest choice I could ever make to do a podcast. It's free to use. You don't got to pay for nothing. You can record episodes whenever you're ready. You can edit it and then you can release them when you want to. And you don't have to worry about trying to figure out how you're going to distribute it on other platforms because Anchor has partnerships with Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket Cast, whatever you name it. Because the Playmakers Wild Podcast is the podcast that I use. We are on all them platforms. We are on 9 platforms just by using the Anchor app. So pretty much all the questions that you have questions about doing a podcast, go to the Anchor app or go to the Anchor website, anchor.fm.com, and just search through it, ask questions. Because I tell you, a free app that does all this, there's nothing more you can ask for. I even got friends, they doing their podcast on the Anchor app. Faith Talk, you might have heard of it because it's very good. And it's great that it's an app like this, it's a website like this that makes it easier for people to do podcasts and do what they love best, talking about the things that they love to talk about. So give Anchor a try, see how much you like it. We'll love to hear your podcast.
From 1995 to 2001, Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Entertainment, then known as the World Wrestling Federation, were in a heated television ratings war with the now defunct World Championship Wrestling, owned by Ted Turner. During this time, both companies were willing to take risks to try and one-up the competition. But in 1998, the WWF went to extreme lengths to not only attempt to increase the ratings for Monday Night Raw, which at the time was Raw is War, but to also settle an internal dispute and prove who's the toughest man on the WWF roster. Really was undoubtedly the worst and stupidest idea in professional wrestling. Ladies and gentlemen, that would be the Brawl for All.
What a nice introduction, Alex.
Well, gotta do my best. Gotta give the fans a good show.
Yeah, man. And, to understand why the Brawl for All happened, we have to kind of dive a little bit into the Attitude Era. So I'm going to segue a little bit into how the whole Attitude Era started. And yeah. So pretty much like you said, in 1995, Ted Turner decided to start WCW Nitro and go head to head with Raw is War. And Eric, what happened was the whole United States was actually evolving, and I think it was a smart business move when they brought in Vince Russo to WWF. And he started bringing in, started using the sex, the rebellion, the violence, and the language that the 16 to 30-year-olds in the United States were already watching at the time, and start to base Raw is War around that. Television was evolving, movies were evolving, music was evolving, the internet was evolving. Professional wrestling had to evolve with times. Eric Bischoff from WCW, who was booking WCW at the time, he caught on to that early on, and he used the NWO to make that change, which kind of forced the WWF to have to adapt as well. Not everything that was involved in the Attitude Era was great. They made a lot of mistakes, but I still say that it was definitely the most important and most popular time in professional wrestling because everybody was a fan, whether you were a fan of WCW, WWF, ECW, or all three. Everybody was a fan at the time, including celebrities, athletes, musicians. It became a part of pop culture. And like it was cool to be the wrestling fan. Like the wrestling fan was cool. If you didn't watch wrestling, you weren't cool. And as someone who was kind of, I wouldn't say bullied in school, but I was picked on a little bit. When wrestling became the popular thing, it was it was kind of like Revenge of the Nerds, you know?
Mm-hmm. See, and that's a little life regret because I was such a young kid. I mean, I didn't start watching the WWE until I was 6, and since I was so young, I was not old enough to know that there was actually a war with WCW and all that. The thing with ECW, had I been in my teens, I guarantee you I would have made the best time I can to watch all 3 shows and like make some comparisons. I would still be shocked, they would have turned Hulk Hogan heel, but I understand why they did it, and. Sometimes I might be wrong to say, but sometimes I feel like the NWO is the only thing that kept WCW alive during that time. I mean, that's probably just me because I was a kid that loved the WWF, and even that time I did my research, and I was so mad at Tony Schiavone when he said, he'd leaked the results and said, thought I'd put some butts in the seat.
When Mankind won the belt, yeah, man.
That was when I first started watching wrestling. I remember watching that match with my mom, and my mom was supporting The Rock, and she kept saying he hit him with a chair. It's not fair. I'm like, yeah. What about all the other wrestlers who attacked Mankind and interfered in the match? Was that fair? But anyway, yes, the Attitude Era really shaped up professional wrestling, especially in the favor of WWE, because before that, there was all these cartoonish characters. It was really making it a joke. They needed to make wrestling more serious. And it seems that Vince Russo was the guy they brought in. However, when the Attitude Era started, there were, like you said, there were a lot of mistakes in the whole Attitude Era. But this thing, the Brawl for All, well, like we just said, Definitely. It was a really stupid mistake. So let's get right to it, Chris. What do you think of? Give me your first initial thoughts on it.
The Brawl for All concept from the jump, I say bad idea from the jump. All right, because if you watch the episode. Vince Russo says pretty much the whole reason was to shut Bradshaw up. So to do this, he proposes the idea of a shoot fight tournament to Vince McMahon to see who the toughest man in the locker room really is, and try to use that realism to boost the ratings. Of course, Vince McMahon was all over this, and they decided that the winner would receive $75,000 and the feud with the WWF's top star at the time, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Mind you, these guys were not trained boxers or trained fighters. The referees were pro wrestling referees, and the judges were not boxing or fight judges. So pretty much you threw a bunch of amateurs in there who just threw punches, and I mean that right there is just a pot of just a mess right there. I mean, it was just a bad idea from the jump, Alex.
I mean, exactly, and all because Bradshaw said, because we all know how he was arrogant and such an egomaniac at the time. I mean, a lot of wrestlers in their shoot interviews will say that. It's all because he's like, you know what, I'm the toughest guy. And it's all because he was just being stupid, and then Vince Russo has to make matters worse by pitching a very stupid idea to Vince, and then Vince does the stupidest part, he accepts. And keep in mind, actually, I think Charles Wright, who at the time, wasn't the Godfather yet. I think
he was still Kama Mustafa.
Yeah, he was Kama Mustafa. Yeah, this is like between the Godfather and Papa Shango. I think he was the only guy who was actually a legitimate trained fighter because he's a former bouncer, and he's actually he was like, I'm not sure. I just remember he mentions he was a bouncer, so he was the only guy who probably was trained.
Yeah, man, and
in a form of physical combat.
Say, as a kid when this was airing. And you don't know anything that's behind it, you're thinking as a child or as a teenager, like, wow, what is this? Could be interesting. And then as the weeks went on, you just see that it looked good on paper. On paper, it looked good, like it can work, but in actuality and reality, it was a failure.
It was, and the whole thing with Dr. Death Steve Williams. That's what really made it interesting, but also what really made it interesting, now I already knew the long-time real legitimate heat between Vince Russo and Mr. Jim Cornette. I mean, I think that the outcome of the Brawl for All just stirred the level of hatred between the two into a whole new level. Like, if things were already bad, but it literally went from bad to worse. I mean, Jim Cornette made that clear himself.
Oh yeah, they've had heat for a long time, and yeah, I agree. The Brawl for All definitely didn't help mend any of those bridges there, because Dr. Death Steve Williams was he had just been signed to the WWF when they were starting this Brawl for All. And they wanted, he was a legitimate badass. I mean, he was a football player. He was out in Japan beating the crap out of the Japanese guys, which for an American dude to go over to Japan and beat the crap out of Japanese guys like he did, I mean, that's almost unheard of. Even today, it's unheard of. So here they have this guy who is notoriously probably the toughest guy in professional wrestling at the time, okay? And they already wanted to bring him in to work Stone Cold. And what I just found funny is that the winner would receive a match against Stone Cold. He's put into this tournament. Now, I know during the whole episode, Jim Ross denies it and Bruce Pritchard denies it. But I'm sorry, I'm someone that kind of doesn't believe in coincidences. You want this guy to work Stone Cold. So you put him in the tournament. I mean, it had to have been set up or they wanted to work it to where he wins. Think about it this way. They can't work a shoot fight, right? They can't tell the guys to go out there and what to do. They're going to do a shoot fight. They're going to beat the crap out of each other. But if they threw a ringer in there, then it could work out the way they planned. Am I right? I mean, as a sportscaster, wouldn't that seem the obvious idea there?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And as a sports writer, I say it doesn't make sense to have this whole real fight. I mean, it was already a huge risk. If you're letting them fight for real, I mean, think of everything you're risking. I mean, the injuries, they can never wrestle again, and think of how much money would have lost. I mean, Jim Cornette. I mean, after it was all said and done, when I think especially when Dr. Death Steve Williams suffered,
when he got knocked out.
He got knocked out, but he also suffered. I think it was a hamstring injury. He tore something.
Yeah.
I mean, Jim Cornette. I mean, was so pissed off. He goes to Vince Russo and says, I think he said, "Congratulations, you just cost the company $5 million, and you just embarrassed the company." And Vince Russo is blowing it off like it's no big deal.
I'm glad you brought that up because that caught my eye too. And I think what he was talking about was the contract that Dr. Death had signed. I think that's the $5 million he was talking about because the winners only got $75,000, but Dr. Death Steve Williams was just signed to, I would probably think, at least a few-year deal, right?
Exactly.
So you have to think that's a lot of money. Now, he was never able to compete in WWF again.
Exactly.
Like, that killed his not only his WWF career, but his reputation as a badass.
Yeah.
The company lost money right there because they cannot build him back up after losing to Bart Gunn.
I mean, it's not just money. I mean, they lost interest. Like, a lot of fans who said, "Yeah, I'm never watching this shit again. What the hell did they just do?"
Fans were chanting it was boring. They thought this is what the fans would want, but you had already just told them, a few years prior that, hey, this is set up. So now you're saying you don't want to insult their intelligence, but you are insulting their intelligence by now trying to put a legitimate shoot fight out there and expect the fans to react the way you want them to. Maybe in the 80s, like, this could have been like, oh yeah, because back in the 80s and the 70s, people still thought it was real.
Yeah.
In 1998, I'm sorry, the cat was out the bag. This was sports entertainment. Now you're trying to turn it into a shoot fight. It totally backfired on them.
I mean, backfire is an understatement. Although to say, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, Dr. Death was probably about 39 years old when he arrived to the WWF. Now, personally, like, if he was at that part of his career, I mean, it usually means like he's past his prime. I mean, but like I said, he's a legitimate badass, so maybe he did have so much left in the tank. But
we'll never know now.
We'll never know now because see, this is the whole thing about the whole Brawl for All. I mean, one of the outcomes, like, what if? I mean, Bart Gunn, the whole thing, and when Bart Gunn won, I mean, as soon as he won, did they give him? Yeah. What was he supposed to get again? Like you said, you're supposed to. He was
supposed to receive $75,000 cash, mm-hmm. and a feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin.
And the feud never happened.
Never happened. That's actually what I want to get to next because Bart Gunn definitely was the underdog this whole time. Not one person expected him to knock out Dr. Death, let alone win the tournament. So he was the underdog from day one. I still feel in my heart that Steve Williams was set up. that Steve Williams was set up to win this, and Bart Gunn wound up getting the shit end of the stick. Like I said, the winner's supposed to receive $75,000 in a feud with Stone Cold. They were mad at Bart Gunn because he won a legitimate shoot fight. I mean, you put him in that position. You can't hold that against him. It was a shoot tournament. He won legitimately. And that was the whole point, to prove who the toughest man was. Bart Gunn proved he was the toughest man in the locker room throughout this tournament. And then what do? They give him a pair of gold gloves, and then at WrestleMania they bring in Butterbean as a punishment. I mean, that was just a low blow. If you really wanted to stay true, I mean, you could have created a star out of Bart Gunn and made him look like the biggest badass. He knocked out the biggest badass in wrestling, Dr. Death. That's a storyline right there, man.
Exactly.
He could have been pushed to the moon, right in line for a match with Stone Cold, but it's not how they wanted it worked out. That's why I say there is no way that this was not set up for Dr. Death Steve Williams to win this. Because if it wasn't, then it wouldn't have mattered who won.
See, everything we're saying, it just makes us realize how more stupid the whole thing was. And Vince was pissed off that Dr. See, remember how it was set up? You're right, because it was mentioned that Vince McMahon was legitimately pissed off that Dr. Death did not win the tournament. And that's why he punished Bart Starr by feeding him to that boxer and then not giving him what was promised.
Yeah. I mean, and again, you could have created a new star out of Bart Gunn, but he is not the guy you wanted to. And I mean, he really got the shit end of the stick, because what happened with his career after that? He went out to Japan, made a little name for himself in Japan, but after that, it was kind of like this Brawl for All killed a lot of careers. I mean, look at injuries alone. And this is one of the biggest reasons why Brawl for All was widely considered the worst idea in pro wrestling, and that's the injuries. We'll start off with Dr. Death Steve Williams. He suffered a torn hamstring that killed his WWF career and reputation. Okay? We have the Godfather, who sustained injuries from the Brawl for All that kept him out for months. Savio Vega aggravated a previous arm injury and was never seen in the WWF again, and Brockus was forced to retire due to injuries.
You see? Exactly. This thing is like a deliberate move to like put wrestlers at risk and then to affect the company's future. I mean, overall, this is Vince McMahon's idea. All three people were stupid. Bradshaw was stupid because he was just saying, "Oh, I'm tough," and then Vince Russo is stupid to pitch in that idea, and then Vince makes the stupidest decision to accept that idea. I mean, if I were Vince, I would have said, "Vince, what the hell is Vince Russo? What the fuck is this? Get out of here!" I mean,
But that's the thing. If you remember in the episode, the way Vince Russo pitched it to Vince, he pitched it in the way that he knew Vince McMahon would agree to it. Hey, let's put on this shoot fight. We'll see who the toughest badass is. It's going to be real, so people are going to tune in to watch a real fight. He really oversold it. And of course, Vince is, let's do it. And again, from the jump, it was just a stupid idea. And you could have made a star out of it, and you chose not to.
I mean, empty promises. I mean, I feel bad for, but I mean, even to this day.
Yeah, man. I mean, and look what happened to Draws. I mean, that's not because of the Brawl for All, But I mean, these guys take risks every day they're in the ring. And this is why I brought up Draws, is after this Brawl for All thing, no, he didn't suffer really any injuries, any threatening injuries in the Brawl for All. But he was already taking a risk, and then some years later, off of a freak accident, no one really knows how it happened, he breaks his neck on a powerbomb. Like, at what point do you realize, like, oh man, like maybe this whole thing was a bad idea? Like, on paper, again, it looked good. And if you go back, they came to Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn to participate. So now you're throwing in two legitimate shoot fighters who are trained in MMA to go against these guys who, it's a shoot fight, they're going to get injured.
Mm-hmm. Ken Shamrock, actually, he declined, he wanted no part of it, and I can't blame him. But also, one thing I have in mind, I wonder if Bart Starr actually even got that $75,000 at least. I've been asking myself that.
I just want to correct it at Bart Gunn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say Bart Starr?
Yeah.
My bad, folks. But Bart Gunn, I mean, the question on my mind, I hope he got that 75 grand.
From what I've been researching, according to Bob Holly, Dr. Death Steve Williams was paid the money up front.
Yeah.
So that tells me, okay, if he was paid the money up front, you threw him in here, you were rooting for him the whole time, and then you got mad at the guy who knocked him out. This was 100%. I don't care what JR says. I don't care what Jim Cornette says. I don't care what Bruce Pritchard says. It's not a coincidence. Your guy, you put your guy in there, you put your ringer in there, and your ringer got knocked out. Because, again, it's a shoot fight.
Not only that, he got hurt.
On any given day, anybody could have won.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shoot fight, you know?
Yeah.
So, if Dr. Death would have never torn his hamstring, maybe things would have worked out the right way. But again, it's a shoot fight. This is real. Nothing was choreographed.
Nothing. I mean, that's the key right there, folks. Legitimate means no script, no nothing. You go out there, you literally fight. And not only that, but according to Bob Holly, it was actually a $100,000 prize money before the fight against Bart Gunn.
Oh wow, $100,000. So what happened to the other 25,000?
Well, according to what I'm reading, Bradshaw apparently received 25,000. Huh.
Well,
So I would ask Vince, did you give Bradshaw the 25 grand so he can drown his sorrows because he's no longer considered the toughest guy? He can't say he is, and it's been proven that he's not that tough.
And you know another thing that really made this fight get out there was the fact that the rules were so fucked. Like, it was so mixed. Like, no one really understood the rules. It was just so scatterbrained. Like, there was no organization in it. And like I said, the refs were not boxing or fight referees. The judges were not boxing or fight judges. So what legitimacy is there here?
I mean, total.
But I mean, I really want to talk about Godfather because he really stuck out to me.
A very underrated, one of the most underrated guys from the Attitude Era, if you ask me. But I feel bad for him how his Papa Shango character died, all because from what I understand, he was supposed to have this. There was a match between Hulk Hogan and Psycho Sid, and there was a time like he was supposed to run in, break up the pin, but he missed the cue, and then the whole thing got messed up, and then Vince decided to kill the push and kill the character. But I think Papa Shango was unique. I mean, if they had to use, I mean, they weren't even using him right before that too. I mean, they were just using him as a monster that could, curse his opponent by, all of a sudden he does something and then they feel sick.
I mean, for the time.
Yeah.
For the time, 93, 94, 95. I mean, yeah. I mean, that's right up there early. They were there with the gimmicks, but now we were in a whole new era. So they gave him that one of his first gimmicks after Papa Shango, I believe, was Kama
Mustafa.
The Supreme Fighting. Yeah. They tried to make him like a mixed martial arts.
Oh yeah, that's right, yeah. That's before. This is before the Nation of Domination.
Yeah, and then when he joined the Nation, he started showing signs of that Godfather character. But what's really funny is this actually came from Godfather. I seen it on a WWE Network interview. Before he joined the Nation of Domination, they were thinking about bringing back Papa Shango. They had pitched the idea to him to kind of reinvent the Papa Shango character and reintroduce him to WWE TV. But I believe he said like that night they just came up to him and was like, "Hey, you're joining the Nation."
That's it. Like he probably didn't bother asking why because he didn't want to he didn't want to ruin more opportunities out of him. So I mean, I don't know if he mentioned. See, I remember the interview. I think I know what you were talking about. He probably felt like there was no point of bringing back Papa Shango because they already killed him. I mean, if you kill off a character, is it really worth it to revive it?
They had done photo shoots with new gear and everything. Like they was ready to put this character out there on TV, and like last minute they just pulled the plug. I mean, maybe it was the best thing for him because if he would have stood as Papa Shango, who knew if he would have had the Godfather.
Well, if he had stuck with Papa Shango like in 1994-95, I think a good feud for him would have been against the Ultimate Warrior if he had stayed. Definitely the Undertaker. I mean, him and the Undertaker in a casket match would have been great. See, the whole Papa Shango thing. I wrote an article a year or so ago about 5 gimmicks that disappeared, and I explained the Papa Shango character. I mean, I couldn't go too deep into detail because it was like all these research like sources were just still like it was dead ends, like not making sense. But it's that like I
I
feel
mean,
like
sometimes in pro wrestling, it really is just like that. Like one week you're on TV with a character, and they're like, you know what? No, no, back to the drawing board. It really is like that. So if you can't find a reason why the character was killed off, or a storyline as to how it happened, most likely it was just boom, nixed right then and there.
see, I don't know if it's true, but I read somewhere that the idea for the character, I mean, this might be wrong, but it said I think Jerry Lawler had something to do with coming up with the character. I mean, the character I read that it's based off the 1973 James Bond film. If you've seen the film, there's a bad guy in there that's like a voodoo warrior, and I think it said that the character idea came from that idea. So if Vince like had pitched in that idea, I would say, well, you should watch the film and see. Since I've seen the movie, I would say, well, watch the film and see how that guy performs, and then you can see how like, you'll get a good idea on how to use Shango, like make him immune to pain, make him laugh maniacally, like when somebody does something to him. But it's what if. I mean, it's all what if this had happened? What if the whole thing had worked out? But I think a Shango feud with Hulk Hogan like that early would have been. He wouldn't have
I
been
mean,
ready for it. They should just have him feud with these other guys first. A feud with the Undertaker first should have happened.
it's also like again, like the whole world was changing, man. Like the
Yeah.
whole, good guy. No one liked the good guy. It was kind of like we were turning into the world was turning into rebellious teenagers, and we needed products for rebellious teenagers. And that's just kind of the best way to see it. WWE needed to move on to their grunge movement. We had the nice 80s rock and roll. We had the glam rock movement, which I love the glam rock movement. And then as the 90s came in, you had the grunge, you had the alternative rock. Professional wrestling as a whole needed that same thing, so which attitude, like I said, the attitude era, yes, there were some mistakes like that were made, but all in all, I believe without the attitude era, wrestling would not have been as popular, nor I don't think people would really be watching wrestling today.
Well, I mean, wrestling today. What it's been, but what it's been lately. I'm not. I mean, I can't even stand it. But anyway. But yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, no one really liked the faces. I mean, I like how you mentioned the world was changing because you remember when Sergeant Slaughter had the Iraqi sympathizer gimmick? See, that's part of the idea. The world was changing, so it came to the point where an anti-American Russian character had become stale because the Cold War was over. And since during that time the United States involved that thing with Iraq, maybe an anti-American Iraqi sympathizer character would have felt suit. But I mean, to have Sergeant Slaughter have that kind of character, especially since he's a former U.S. drill sergeant and he was in the Marines. I mean, it was really a huge risk for him to have that character, but
Oh yeah, I mean, he'll say it like fans really wanted his head. He was getting
yeah.
death
Oh
threats,
yeah.
bomb threats at the arenas.
Oh.
That's that's a character. That's when you can draw money. That's when you're a good heel.
Mm-hmm.
Like when these fans really believe it. And at that time, it was still kind of believable. It was still kind of real to fans.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So to have he was GI Joe. He was the physical form of GI. He was GI Joe.
Yeah.
He played GI Joe, and here you have GI Joe joining our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how could you not hate that?
Yeah. Exactly. And before we go back to we got a little bit too far into past characters. Like he said that Vince wanted him to burn the American flag. Like on TV. I'm like, no, I would not do that. No, we can't take it that far. But, a lot of my friends ask me, since I'm of Arabic descent, how do I feel about that character? Like, well, it's not racist, but it's a huge risk because of all the death threats he got, and especially from during that time. But I understand, but I tell people, keep in mind, I mean, in wrestling, there's a lot of times where there were heels that were anti-Americans, that they were Russian, or, they could be whatever, but they needed a new anti-American character, and since, there was the Gulf War, I guess, an Iraqi sympathizer made the most sense.
I agree, man. That was the perfect way to build a new heel.
Yeah, it's just, just really interesting.
This is professional wrestler Chris Rex, and you're listening to the Playmakers Blog Podcast, my only destination for sports talk radio.
Now, moving on, so, after all that was over, it's just amazing how and then after the whole discussion with Brawl and all ended, and how Jim Cornette, I mean, looking at him as he was saying, you could just tell he got really pissed talking about Vince Russo because he hates him. I mean, to say that he hates him is an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely no Christmas greetings there. I'll tell you that.
I mean, I don't know, like, exactly. I mean, some people say I don't know who's right or wrong in the whole situation, but
I mean, to really understand Jim Cornette and Vince Russo's beef, so to say, really what it is a difference in opinion and a view of wrestling. Jim Cornette views wrestling one way, and he has that old school mentality. And yes, he's very smart, and I'm sure he knows what the hell he's talking about. But at the same time, you have a guy who's introducing something new to professional wrestling that Jim Cornette at the time was not used to. I'm sure today will still hates the attitude. I'm sure he does. But all it really comes down to is a difference of opinion.
Exactly.
You hate each other over a difference of opinion. Like, me personally, I don't like that old school style of wrestling. To me, that's kind of boring to me. I prefer the cruiserweights, the lucha libre, that high impact, fast paced action. That's what made me a fan.
see,
But
me too. I feel the exact same way.
but there are some elements of the old school wrestling. Like, I'll agree with Jim Cornette on how to build a proper heel. And that you have to get sympathy from the face, and like the heel cannot be cool. I agree with that. But there was also, again, a different time in wrestling when Cornette was booking, and it was the 80s, man. Now we're talking about the 90s. Like I said, it was all about rebellion and pretty much just fuck you, fuck you, fuck the world. That was the attitude. And I mean, no pun intended. That was the attitude,
I mean,
man.
Stone Cold Steve Austin comes to mind, especially when he mentioned the rebellion, because Vince McMahon had the evil boss, Mr. McMahon character, and it's like a dictator, and Stone Cold is the rebel who's who's fighting the dictatorship. I mean, Stone Cold was kind of like the rebellion guy, as you mentioned. But see, and I understand, and you're absolutely right, because see, I didn't watch. I mean, I've watched a little bit of wrestling from back then, like the AWA, the Jim Crockett Promotions. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I understand that NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, they became one, and then it eventually became WCW. Like when Ted Turner bought those two, I think he made it to WCW. I mean, I'm not too sure, but the wrestling style was so different. I mean, see, what really got me. I mean, what I have loved as a kid is the hardcore matches. I mean, especially when Big Boss Man had them, I loved them. The I Quit matches. I mean, those kinds of matches really got me to it. I mean, I always felt like just a regular singles match is kind of boring, but
they always gave a reason for you to tune in.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like every Monday night, whether you're watching WCW or whether you were watching WWF, there was always something that you're like, I have to tune into that because it's not just a singles match. It's a Hell in a Cell match on Raw. I have to tune in. The NWO has a new member debuting tonight. I have to tune in. So they gave you reasons to think and want to watch. It wasn't just your standard jobber versus superstar. It wasn't two mid-card guys. There was always some element of surprise in there and shock value.
Exactly. I mean, as we mentioned several times before, I mean, the Attitude Era was just, it was to put wrestling like I'm not sure how to put it, to basically to modernize it, to bring it to the new to a new era, like basically to get with the program, basically. You know what I mean? I mean,
and I was just actually looking up. We forgot one more injury, and it's somebody we haven't even mentioned this whole time. Steve Blackman. He won the initial Brawl for All match against Mark Merrow, but he had to withdraw due to an injury he sustained during training for the Brawl for All. So there goes one more. Road Warrior Hawk was injured.
Do you think that the injury Steve Blackman suffered, do you think maybe that's why he never really had a big push in the WWF?
I really can't say because he did last up until I would say the year 2000, maybe 2001, maybe he was still there. So I think it was just one of those things like he really he really couldn't, like, there was no character to him. There wasn't really no he wasn't a good promo guy. And that's a big thing with pro wrestling is you have to be able to sell yourself and you have to be able to make people want to watch your match. When you go to cut that promo, there needs to be a reason why fans want to watch your match. And sometimes when he cut a promo, it was just so bland and you can tell like it was out of his element. So it's hard to really give a guy a push that like his character is that he's a legitimate fighter. Steve Blackman, he's not the world's most dangerous man. But he was something similar to that. I know him and Ken Shamrock had a feud over the world's most dangerous man, gimmick. But he was portrayed as a legitimate fighter. But outside of that, there really was nothing. At least in my opinion, there was really nothing entertaining about it. Like I never sat there and said I'm looking forward to a Steve Blackman match, except for the match with Shane McMahon at SummerSlam 2000, because that was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So, and as I'm looking at it, and one fact we should mention is most of the participants of the Brawl for All, they departed the company within a year. Steve Blackman of The Godfather would last until 2002, while Hardcore Holly, or as you know, Bob Holly, as a lot of people like to mention, refer him to, he was there until 2009. You see, and that's a fact that we were talking about. Like all these wrestlers that were in it, some of them just did not last even longer. Like they were gone.
Yeah, man. And also to throw PCO in there, who are now known as PCO, to throw him in there as he's a guy with one eye. Why would you even book him in this?
It's like, do you really want to end his career on purpose? I mean, yeah. See, another factor, folks, why the whole thing's a stupid idea. I mean,
yeah. I would love, like, I was really hoping that, like, through this podcast we'd find at least something good to talk about from the Brawl for All, but because I hate being so cynical and negative. But I mean, there's really nothing I can sit there and say good came out of this. Well, nothing.
The fact is, there is nothing that came good out of it. Nothing. I mean, I'm glad I didn't see it at the time because I wasn't watching wrestling then, but I was only a kid, so I'm sure I would have been bored, but I wouldn't have understood what was going on. Although I would have asked myself, why are they boxing? They're supposed to, body slam. They're supposed to do this, that. Excuse me. But the whole thing, I'm like, why would they do this in a professional wrestling or sports entertainment company?
And
what the fuck?
The amount of, and even those that really weren't seriously injured, how long did their careers last after this? I mean, it has to have some long-term effect on your career, on your body. It definitely takes years off your career.
I mean, I don't know if Bradshaw got hurt, but Bradshaw, we don't know how his career actually got better. I mean, I think this was before he was with Ron Simmons. This was before the Acolytes Protection Agency came to be.
Yeah, I think before that.
Yeah, so I think out of every guy that was in the tournament, obviously Bradshaw is the one who ended up having the best career out of it. Unless there's somebody else I'm actually forgetting about.
No, I mean I'm looking at the brackets now, and everyone that participated. I mean, yeah, Bradshaw wound up having the best career. So can we kind of unofficially say that the only thing? No, because I can't even say that Bradshaw's career came because of Brawl for All. There was nothing positive I can say about this. No. Whoever's listening, I am sorry. I have nothing positive to say. I am really trying to find something positive here, but there really is nothing, man.
Kris, the truth is, you're being honest, because any true wrestling fan that watched it, besides you and me, we know that it's the truth. There is nothing positive about it. So, by us being negative about the whole situation, we're being honest. I mean, we're telling the truth, and that's what I'm committed to as a sports writer. We tell the truth. I tell like it is. For those of you who listen to my personal podcast, the Bear of Texas podcast, you see it in the description. This is a podcast committed to telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And also take that also in this one, while we represent the Playmakers blog and the dark side of the pod. You just tell the truth, because that's what a podcast is all about. We have to tell the truth, and the truth of the matter is the Brawl for All has nothing positive. So I would be lying if I'm saying the Brawl for All is actually cool. This is actually positive. I mean, I would be looking like a goddamn fool. And And as Kris mentioned, you don't believe in coincidence, but I kind of feel like it's funny how Bradshaw's career is the one who skyrocketed out of the guys who actually survived.
I mean, yeah, like he stayed on for a long time, but also Bradshaw was also like a company guy. Put the bullying aside and the ego aside and the toughness aside, he really was a company guy. He could probably, I'm sure he had opportunities to leave, but he didn't. And because of that loyalty, he remained to the company. Eventually, he was able to go on and form a great tag team with Ron Simmons, Farouk at the time. And then as they were just they were actually just thrown together because there was nothing to do with either of them. That's the actual story of how the APA came together during the Ministry of Darkness. They just kind of threw them together because they had nothing for them, and they turned it into something. And then after the Ministry of Darkness went away, they turned it into one of the best gimmicks in wrestling, the Acolytes Protection Agency.
I loved it.
They had the best gimmick ever. All they had to do was sit backstage and drink beer, man.
Drink beer, play cards.
Yeah, but it was entertaining. It was entertaining.
It was entertaining, and
I wish I could say the same about Brawl for All, but
I mean, folks, it's the gospel of truth. Brawl for All has nothing entertaining. I mean, basically, out of Brawl for All, we've covered everything, but except we have to get the draws. But
honestly, I think if they would have maybe put, let's say, Steve Blackman, Mark Merrow, Steve Williams, and Dan Severn in there. Just those four guys. You want to see who the toughest guy? You want to throw a shoot fight? Then you take the four trained athletes. Okay, you take the four trained athletes and put them against each other. Don't put all these other guys who are amateurs, not even amateurs, who have never boxed a day in their life, and throw some gloves on them and have them beat the crap out of each other. When you already have four guys who are claiming they're the toughest badasses, and it's kind of their track record has been proven because they're legitimate fighters. Aside from Dr. Death Steve Williams, these guys were legitimate fighters. So why not throw them in a maybe a Steve Blackman versus Ken Shamrock, and then Dan Severn versus Steve Williams, and boom, the winner of those two. Then you could do your little shoot fight thing. I think that would have worked out a lot better because you have trained guys who know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, it's clear to me that the concept. I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but it seems clear that Vince didn't think it through.
Oh, I don't think anybody thought it through. Like I said, it was an idea that was pretty much created out of ego.
Exactly.
And just personal issues, because Bradshaw, yes, he was a loudmouth, but that's in any sports locker room. There's always going to be that competition of someone thinking they're the badass, that they can knock anyone. That's anywhere, man. Anytime you have a bunch of testosterone-filled males in a locker room 360 days a year, someone's gonna think they're the toughest one. I mean, it's just nature. Like there can't, like we said on our previous episodes, there can't be two top guys. There can't be two top badasses. There can only be one legitimate badass. And from what we've seen through all this, as the underdog, Bart Gunn proved he was the biggest badass in the WWF locker room. And I think maybe that's a great way to end the show, Alex. Bart Gunn was the most legitimate badass in the WWF locker room in 1998.
Yes, and the exclamation point of it is he got punished for it.
And what's funny is he didn't even want to be in it in the first place until they offered him the push. So that was the only reason he was really in it, and you took that away from him.
I mean, I feel bad for him. I mean, if to say that I feel bad for him is an understatement. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, I don't know how today he feels about it. He's probably just like, "Oh, it happened." But I'm like, no, they lied to you. They took something from you, man. That's not right. It's not right at all. So shame. So shame on you, Vince. Shame on you.
100%. And like I said, I don't really agree with Jim Cornette a lot. There's a few things I'll agree with him on, but this right here, Brawl for All, I definitely agree with him wholeheartedly, 100%. Even Vince Russo at the end of this interview admits it was a mistake. It was the stupidest idea. So everyone involved even JR is saying this was completely stupid and should have never been done.
It shouldn't have happened. It's simple as that. I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you say it. I mean, it's quite clear. It should not have happened. And as far as Bart Gunn goes, God bless him. And
why not? And if you wanted to put Dr. Death, I'm sorry for cutting you off. If you wanted to put Dr. Death against Stone Cold, bring him in as the badass he already was, and not taint his reputation as that, you should have just done it. You should have just done it. Start the build. Have him come out and say, maybe I'm getting into fantasy booking here, but have him come out and say, hey, Stone Cold, you think you're the toughest son of a bitch in the WWF? Well, I'm the biggest badass in the world. So why don't you put yourself up against me? They could have easily just dropped him into a story with him.
Yeah, they could have built him. Yeah, they could have built him.
They wanted to create this Brawl for All to prove once and for all that Steve Williams was the badass, just to shoo him into this storyline, and it completely blew up in everybody's faces.
And it absolutely backfired. And folks, this is one of the what ifs right now as we close this. What if it never happened? Well, the outcome of what if it never happened? Well, we will never know.
That's the facts. That's the facts.
And I'm all about getting the facts straight, homie. Well, that does it for this week. Now, next week, the episode that will air will involve Jimmy Snuka and the death of the mysterious death of his girlfriend. Tune into it because next week it will be covered. And be prepared, folks, because me and Kris are going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
For those, if you want to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it's at Rex Wrestles, REXWRESTLES. And you can catch me on Pipe Bomb Radio with Motley Mondays every Monday at 5:30 p.m. We're bringing the best of glam rock. Take care.
Y'all have a good day. Y'all be safe.